today. We're delighted to have Richey Ward here with us from HPE. So Richey's an advanced threat response analyst at HPE or here in Galway, or working from home at the moment as he is, and he's a member of itag Cyber Forum and a mentor for the cyber program. So we're delighted to have him. He's a great wealth of information, so please feel free to join in. That's what the Cyber Tuesday is about, and ask plenty of questions. Thanks a million. I'll hand it over to you. If you could just unmute, guys.
Just make sure I'm mute there, guys. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Hi, guys. I'm Richey Ward. Thanks, Caroline, for introducing me. I'm part of the Advanced Threat Response team in Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Just going to minimize my thumbnails there. So a little bit about me, first of all, before we get started. That's obviously my pre-COVID haircut, a long ways from what I look like now. But as I mentioned, I'm part of the Advanced Threat Response team at HPE Galway. I'm a cyber professional since 2014. I have a couple of certifications as well, CompTIA Security Plus. I have the OSCP, which is the Offensive Security Certified Professional. That's mainly revolving around pen testing. I'm also SANS forensic trained, so I'm able to perform forensic acquisitions to a competent level. And currently I'm undergoing a master's in cybersecurity in Letterkenny, LYIT, which is a wonderful experience. Part of my role is I specialize in advanced threat detection and response within HPE's perimeter. So if there's any potential threats that may come into the company, my team or the team I'm part of would specialize in this. We also perform digital forensics on compromised hosts. So if we detect a host that, for example, has malware, we would then, or potentially has malware, we would be able to perform a digital acquisition and understand what's happening on that system. We also work in tandem with the HPE Cyber Defense Center, which is their security operations center here in Galway. We're very much a sister team where they would take care of the more traditional threats and issues, whereas we would deal with more specialized events. So that's kind of who I am and what my team is that we operate with. So the first, this is obviously about digital forensics incident response. What is digital forensics? Well, the word forensics means, comes from Latin meaning before the court. And, you can apply the same logic to forensics in any legal sense. It's a legal evidence that could be used in court. But for the vast majority of my job, the forensic acquisitions that I perform would not be a legal matter. So on the left-hand side, you can see digital forensics. It's in the corporate world, we would often perform digital forensics on assets that may have malware infections. If there's any unauthorized activity on a host, that would be forensically examined as well. Also, for example, if there's any insider threats or if there's any HR or legal issues, for example, if somebody is exfiltrating data, confidential data from their systems, or if they're performing inappropriate activities on their systems, that would be part of the digital forensics. And DFIR is used as one, but it's actually two separate components. You could perform digital forensics on systems with no incident. You may just be investigating. But in the event where there is known malicious or unauthorized activity, you would then commence the second component, which is incident response. And in this instance, what we would do is we gather evidence of activity. We would identify indicators of compromise, and this is an important term you often hear. An indicator of compromise might be a file on a system. It might be an IP address being talked to on the internet. It might be a domain. There's a lot of different indicators of compromise, and the reason why you gather these is because you may find a malicious domain, for example, that might be hosting a phishing domain. What we would then do is we would then look at all the other systems on our network to see is there any other devices speaking on talking to that domain. Also, we would then perform monitoring. So in a week's time, if another system tries to talk to that system, we will be able to detect it in real time. So once all the IOCs are gathered, you sweep for IOCs, as I mentioned, identify other hosts that may be talking to these IOCs or are hosting these IOCs, and we would then update the host list as necessary. And then we would just rinse and repeat that process until the incident is contained. Can I just ask you all to check your mics, please? Thank you. Thanks very much. Once all the assets are identified and remediated, we basically close the incident out. So that's kind of at a high level what DFIR is, digital forensics incident response. So what would you look for if you were sent out to perform a DFIR analysis on a system? Well, there's a lot of things you can look at. On the top here, these are all host-based elements. In other words, these are items that you would find on a server, on a desktop, depending on what the system is, what operating system it is. So starting at the top, you got logging. You might have Windows events, which record security events. For example, somebody logging onto a system, somebody failing to log onto a system, somebody logging off a system, and there's dozens more of artifacts in there. Antivirus logs, for example, was there a malware detection on that system? On the disk side of things, you can, instead of actually physically acquiring the disk of a system, you can pull out a file called the master file table, and that lists all the files, and we're going to see that later on. That lists all the files and directories that are on that system, as well as when they were created or when they were accessed. And that's a really, really useful artifact in DFIR. Configuration items such as the registry in a Windows system. For example, you could see startup items. So, when you start up your Windows to go to work every morning, your Skype might open up or your Teams might open up. There will be registry references to those programs being opened up at startup. There is a plethora of information in the registry, and we're going to touch upon that later on again. Schedule tasks as well. So this is a great way for malware to stay on a system. For example, if I implant malware on your system, I might want to have that run every hour for many reasons. So a scheduled task would run every hour, and it would run my program to make sure that it stays on the system. So even if you shut down the system, turn it back on, that scheduled task is still going to run. Something else as well, memory. Memory is a fantastic fantastic element of determining what is occurring on a system in real time. Malware can often be, highly complex and on the disk, very difficult to understand what's happened, what it does. But when you observe it in memory, where it's actually running, it's like opening up a book or opening up a kind of a map. When it's expanded in memory, you can see it much clearer what it's doing. So memory is an excellent resource for malware infections, or for looking for extra layers of compromise that may not be found in other levels. EDR is something that you don't normally hear outside of a major enterprise, but this is an endpoint detection and response tool. And basically what it does is it sits silently on your system, and a lot of major companies use these. And what they would do is it would perform real-time monitoring on your system. It would look for stuff like suspicious activity, malicious egress, if there's any files being written, or if there's anything suspicious occurring that you have defined rules for, it will alert back to the home base to say, here is suspicious activity on that system. Now, I'm not going to talk any further about EDR because it's not something that is found very often in smaller companies where a lot of people might work. So, also moving on to non-host-based elements. The network is actually one of my favorite artifacts. You got firewall logs. So if two devices are talking to each other on the network, you should be able to see a record of that. What source port, destination port, what ports were used, source IP, destination IP, ports used, what protocol, TCP, UDP, when did it occur, etc. NetFlow is a similar technology, and there is intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, but basically they do the same thing, which is find suspicious or malicious activity on a network. So if they're alerting saying, we've found a signature for something occurring in your system, that will alert you, and it's up to you then to investigate it. Disk actually should be the word auth. I forgot to change that. Authorization logs. So on most medium to large size companies, there is a single authentication system called Active Directory. So Active Directory manages the users and hosts on a network in an enterprise. So if I start working in a company, I will be provisioned a new Active Directory user, and that will be assigned to my PC. I can sit down, I can log in, and then that's basically centralized. If I suddenly leave the company, that access is revoked and I can no longer access the company. VPN logs are also very useful, because a lot of us are working from home now, so we got a VPN into our companies. Single sign-on is a similar technology regarding authentication, but all of these can build a picture of types of activity. If you're in a certain size company, you will often hear the word SIEM or SIM, System Information and Event Management. It's essentially one large bucket for all of the logs that we kind of discussed being put into. So take, for example, the IDS logs, so they might be detecting on malware on the network, but if nobody's looking at those logs, if nobody's logging into the IDS and looking at the logs, that's a problem. You could have $1 million security cameras around your perimeter on the building, but if nobody's looking at the cameras, it doesn't matter. Bad guys are going to get in; they'll see the cameras, but if nobody's looking at the data, then that's a big problem. So a SIM would ingest all that information. It can be small stuff. It could be antivirus logs. It can be the Windows event logs. It can be anything. And once intelligence is built around what the company looks like in a normal day, and what if the company should not be doing, you can generate rules and logic to determine if there's malicious or suspicious activity. And this is a great tool. Again, we're not going to discuss that any further because it's not something that you'd see very often. So I wanted to kind of go through a scenario that I came up with to kind of go through a day in the life of a digital forensics analyst. So I'm taking some artistic license on this. I'm going to say from the get-go, a lot of the artifacts that I discuss will be artifacts that I would look at in the order that I'm going to proclaim. But here is a scenario that I've devised. So Midas Delivery Group are a small logistics and delivery company with 40 employees. They've recently been contacted by a third-party security researcher. The researcher says that a malicious actor is selling confidential information about their customers on the dark web. Now, these requests come in quite a lot to smaller companies because they would not, they wouldn't be of the volition to look at the dark web for their own information being sold. But the researcher was able to obtain a small bit of sample data, and they shared it with the company, and they were able to confirm that this was actually legitimate. So that's a big problem. So they're obviously in panic mode right now. But the first step was, they talked to the IT guy, and he says, we need a specialist here. So as a freelance DFIR specialist, you've been tasked in determining how this occurred. So let's walk through this. And again, this is high level. I'm not going to go too deep in some elements because there are some elements here that are incredibly deep that I'm not going deep on for brevity. And again, some of the artifacts here I'm simplifying for the audience because not everyone would be as technical on some of these elements. So that's okay. So the first steps, you walk in on Monday morning. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to talk to the invested stakeholders. So that will be the CEO, that will be the IT guy. Who else is there? Okay, there's a database administrator. Let's go talk to him. Understand the layout of the company. How many servers do you have? Are they all in the cloud? Are they on site? How many desktops do you have? What's your network looking like? Identify IT components and security items. So do you have firewalls? Do you have Active Directory? Okay, understood, write it down. And once you get a lay of the land, you're gonna, the first real step of an investigation can often be the hardest because you're walking in on with zero kind of what I always call a hook. If you don't have a first hook, it's hard to find it. But once you get that first hook, you can then expand your investigation out. So the first hook of investigation is, what kind of data was stolen is confirmed. Where would this data normally be on the network? How is this data accessed, and when was this data accessed? And the final note, you're walking into a blank canvas here. You know nothing about this network. So until proven otherwise, assume everything on this network is compromised. That's just a safety feature more than anything else. In other words, don't be plugging in your own laptop onto the network. You might expose yourself, or you might have a bad day. Let's just say. So let's having a look at the stolen data. We can see here that the actor is claiming to have stolen thousands of records of customer data, including usernames and passwords, credit card transactions and numbers. That's bad. Customer direct debit data, customer addresses, etc. And again, IT have confirmed that with the samples that they were provided, that is the data that is on their systems. The most recent record of sample was 9 months ago. Now that's the first kind of interesting thing, because that tells us that the breach occurred in the last 9 months. It's a long window, but we have a start. Management are also kind of, their heads are on fire, and they're demanding that all systems are shut down until remediation is completed. So the question is, since compromise is confirmed, which it is, should we shut down everything? And the answer is a resounding no. Why? So a couple of things. One is the data is already stolen. The worst case scenario, the horse has left the barn. The worst case scenario has already occurred. And I put maybe there because I realized there's actually one other further worst case scenario, and that would be data destruction. But we consider that. Second thing is, if you power off a system that's infected, you will destroy critical evidence. Memory is one of the most useful pieces of evidence. But as soon as you power off that machine, it's gone. It's non-recoverable. Same goes for a lot of logging. Logging might, when you power off systems, logging might when you restart it, will clear out the old logging. Bad idea. So you reach a compromise with management. You say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to disconnect this network from the external internet. So we are reaching a mitigation step. That's kind of getting our arms around it, so that there's no further compromise while leaving the systems on. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look around the systems. Once initial IOCs, indicators of compromise, are gathered from hosts, other hosts can be detected and further IOCs gathered. Now, this is a big. This last line might be a throwaway line, but it's actually one of the most important ones. Premature kickout means getting rid of the bad guy, can yield false success. And I've read multiple cases where there's been a breach in a company. They find a malicious piece of malware on a system. They delete it. They all go off to the pub, delighted that they kicked out the bad guy. And 6 points in, they get the phone call saying, "Oh wait, no, he's back," because they didn't do their homework enough. So this is premature kickout is because it ruins a lot of all the IOC that you gathered immediately. If I was a bad guy and I got onto your system, onto your network, and I laid out multiple pieces of malware on it, and I found out that there was active mitigation against me, but you forgot this server over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in new malware that you're not going to detect, or that will have a different signature. So again, that is a critical component of that. So now we understand the data points, or what the data holds. So this is a network diagram of the company. On the right, you can see that this is the desktop space. We have IT manager, CEO, reception, accounts, database admin, warehouse, and there's a server closet of 5 servers. There is the Active Directory we discussed, a file share that's used for archiving the data on the SQL server that's encrypted. There's a VPN that's in use for the company, of course. There's a web proxy, and also there's a SQL server. Now, the SQL server is the server that holds all the juicy data. So having an further interview with the IT manager and database admin, they confirmed that the customer records all are stored in the SQL server, and basically this is where the credit card data would be. So where are the possible intrusion points at this step? So let's just assume, again, we know nothing yet. So let's imagine, the web server, which is hosting the customer data, that could have been exploited, and a bad actor could have come in through that way. That's an option. The file share, that holds encrypted versions of the backups of the SQL server. That could have been exploited. or the SQL Server could have just been accessed directly. But all we need to know is our first line of inquiry will be the SQL Server. By the way, when I say SQL Server, just think database, it's the same thing. So let's have a look at the SQL Server. It's a standard Windows server running 2012. So what I would do is, going in blind, I would pull the following artifacts. I would pull the SQL transaction logs. So every time you run a query against the database, it would record that log, that in the log somewhere. Also, I'll grab the event logs. What the event logs are telling me is who logged onto the server when. And also, I'll take a look at the running processes and network connections. And finally, I'll grab that master file table I talked about, the MFT. So if I determine suspicious activity, I might be able to see what files were written around that time. I'm blowing through these, by the way, because I know I'm over 20 minutes in already and I'm only halfway. So I'm going to go be nice and quick. So the SQL Server transaction logs, which again would be the query sent to the SQL Server. Here's a snippet of them on the right, and you can kind of take a quick look in, and initial inspection says there's nothing really obvious here. You can see the first four here are queries from the web server, and reading the queries, it looks fairly fairly benign. That's normal activity. You can also see here that the bottom three look to be some sort of backup task that's performed at 4 p.m. every day. So okay, let's there's nothing overtly obvious right now. There might be, but at this time we haven't enough evidence to determine. The event logs, this is one of my favorite artifacts again. The event logs documents many things, but for the brevity of this call, I'm just going to say it records the logins and the logoffs. And you can see, first of all, you can see that the IT admin, using his IT admin account, logged in from the IT admin machine on February 14th. Okay, and he was there for, looks like 9 minutes or 6 minutes. The DB admin, who has every right to be on the system, was on there on the 17th. Now, here's an interesting record. You can see here that the DB admin had a failed login, which is a 4625 code. But that could be suspicious, sure. But how many times have you fat-fingered your password, trying to log in the morning? It happened to me twice today, so this could be nothing. Also, you can see shortly after he logged in successfully. So you can see here the IT admin logs in, then the DB admin logs in, and then both IT admin and DB admin log out. That looks fine. Now, on the bottom here, we got something suspicious. We have a log on from the origin using the DB admin account from the warehouse PC. Now, that's a bit odd for multiple reasons. So I would have brought this to the DB admin straight away, and I would have said, do you recognize this activity? And he goes, no, I never used that PC. So that's suspicious. Now, also as well, if you look at the timestamps, that happened at 2 a.m. in the morning. These guys work normal office hours, so that's definitely not this guy. Now, in a real-world scenario, you might have some further context of what occurred in the time period. But unfortunately, the logging in the system was set to low, and therefore all we see are the logins and logouts. But we have a new line of inquiry, this system warehouse. And also we have a kind of a potential window of the breach when it occurred, February 24th. But before we go on to the warehouse, we're going to continue our analysis of the system and having a look at running processes and there's hundreds of running processes on a Windows system, usually in the background. When you open up Notepad, that's a process. When you open up command line, that's a process. But there's still plenty that run in the background. Also, there's lots of network traffic that gets generated legitimately by a system that's running silently. So looking through all that data, again, there was nothing overtly suspicious. So a good way of figuring out what's suspicious and what isn't is comparing it to a known good system. So if you were to compare, we'll say, the list of running items on this system versus a regular SQL server, you should find that the majority of them match up. Any outliers, then you could easily throw up to something called VirusTotal, which will recognize the signatures of the file and say, okay, this is malicious. No, this is fine. This is a Microsoft product. You're all good. Now, this is not a foolproof plan, and I'm not going to get into this, but good programs can be used maliciously. Like PowerShell is a legitimate Microsoft product, but it can be used maliciously. There's also something called DLL hijacking, which means you could see a legitimate process running and it looks absolutely fine, but it's been poisoned by something called DLL hijacking, and therefore it's doing malicious things. That's a lot more difficult to detect, but not impossible. So finally, then I took a look at the master file table, and again, it's a list. Instead of me having to again, connect the disk of that server to my machine for forensic acquisition, I pull the MFT file, lists all the files, lists all the folders. It tells me important information like when the file was created, when the file was modified, and when the file was last accessed. So if I create a notepad file, a text file, at 9 a.m. in the morning, I type in data, I hit save. The create time would be 9 a.m. If I open it again at 10 a.m. and I type more data into it, hit save, the modify time is 10. And if I close it and I open it again at noon, but don't modify it, the access time will be 12. So you can kind of understand what's happening from that system. Also, when a file is deleted from, when you put something into the recycle bin and delete, it doesn't actually get deleted from the disk. It just gets deleted from this table. So that's why if you've ever run undelete tools, if you've accidentally deleted a Word document you're working on and you run an undelete tool, it can try to find that. But the MFT is a very useful product. So now that we have a timeline of events, around 2 a.m. on the 24th, my first look would be to look for what files were created on the system around the time. And here we find 4. There are 3 SQL files. And so these are still on the disk, by the way. So I was able to go and acquire these files. And these are basically the database dumps. In other words, the entire contents of the database is in these files. There's also a tool here, by the way, it's fictitious, called DB Dumper, which I'm assuming was ren, and then it outputted these SQL files. So again, this is probably where the intrusion occurred, or how the data was removed from the database. This is a great concern because we've kind of tied a suspicious logon to suspicious activity. We're almost there calling it malicious, but then again, working fresh in a new company, you don't know if this is malicious or if this is everyday activity. So obviously we talked to the IT guys and the DB admin, and they do not recognize DB dumper. So now we can call this malicious activity. SQL Server is toast. It's been compromised. Well, we can't find anything long lasting, but we know that it was accessed maliciously. The origin logons of that was from this warehouse machine. So this is going to be our next step. We're going to perform similar artifact analysis on the warehouse and see what we come up with. So it's starting to take shape now. So the warehouse PC, it's a regular Windows 10 PC. It has its own user account, warehouse, but there's a lot of guys working in the warehouse. They use it for checking deliveries and printing out stuff. It's used by multiple people. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull similar artifacts like I did the server. I'm going to pull the event logs to see who was logged into the PC. I'm going to take a look at the running processes and network connections. And also I'm going to look at the MFT again for any recent files. I'm going to look at the registry and other components. So the event logs, it showed there was no logged in users at that time. Now that's very odd because we can see somebody, allegedly, or according to the logs, logged in from warehouse and tried to log into the SQL server. Now, having a look at the running processes, we find something stood out straight away. It's explorer.exe, but it's explorer with an O. And this is kind of a defense evasion technique. It's meant to look legitimate, but it's not. So okay, that's definitely odd. So I will grab a copy of that. I will upload this to VirusTotal. So VirusTotal is a tool that you send it a file and it will run it against 70 plus antivirus engines. And it will tell you how many of those antivirus engines say it's bad. So I know it's a bit small here, but this has come back at 68 antivirus engines out of 70 have determined that this is malicious. So my question is, why didn't the antivirus in this system detect it? So further analysis shows that the antivirus was disabled through some unknown means. So, okay, this is getting worse again. Just to be clear, by the way, what a RAT is, it's a remote access tool. Think TeamViewer. If you've ever used TeamViewer, you log in remotely to another system. This is well, TeamViewer in its own essence is a remote access tool. However, there are specifically malicious versions of the same kind of technologies that will sit silently on a system. The user will have no knowledge on the desktop. They will not see anything occurring. And if you're using Dark Comet, for example, you could capture keystrokes. You could run malicious commands on the system. You can grab files in the system. All of that is up for grabs when you have a competent rat. So looking at the network traffic on the system, we see it egresses to a domain called Windows Update, but it's not Windows Update. It's not really Windows at all, but it's, again, defense evasion made to look legitimate. And the IP behind it resolves to an ISP, so like, the Aircom of China. So we kind of, all of this is a screaming bad, 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 bad. Having a look at MFT then, so having a look at what files were created around this time, we see multiple files here. The first three, I should say, are the 3 SQL files we saw on the server. So this tells me that they were most likely taken from the database server and dumped here, most likely for exfiltration. In other words, to take off the network entirely. Here is that Dark Comet rat that was dropped. Now, this is where it gets highly, highly concerning. You see a file here called mimikatz.exe. Now, you can rename it to anything, but you can still check the signatures and see what it does. But Mimikatz is a specialized piece of, I call it software. Some people will call it malware. It's very difficult to run on current Windows systems because Windows Defender catches it all the time. But, AV was disabled, so this is why this software is allowed to run. What it will do is it will dump the passwords of all the users that reside in the system. So whether, even though this is a warehouse system, you may have the IT admin logging in once in a while to configure some items. So if you were able to run Mimikatz, you can dump all of those users' passwords. This is a devastating attack if done correctly. And probably this is even more concerning. You see a file here called addump.txt. And you open it up and it's a record of all of the users in Active Directory. If you remember, Active Directory is essentially all the users on the company. So this guy, whoever the bad guy is, has managed to dump all of the users in the entire company. It's safe to say at this stage that this entire company is compromised. Bad. Yeah, that's the worst case scenario, really, alongside the data loss or the data breach, of course. Even if they were to remove all the malware today, the information gathered by these techniques would ensure that the attacker would get back in through some means. And finally, looking at the registry analysis. So the registry is, it's a big box of configurations. It holds some good metadata like recent items. So, when you open up the start menu and you see your recently opened items, that's data stored in the registry. There's also some good stuff we talked before about the startup items, and there is a reference to this to the Explorer file we talked about, and this is a common technique that's used. So if I run a program and the system gets rebooted, my program will no longer run. So that's, if I'm a bad guy, that sucks. But if I manage to put in persistence, as this is called, when you reboot, my program's going to come back online again. Great. So that's a very good, it's a very good technique. It's often observed. Other mentions in the recent items we talked about was some file here called AVKill. Now we don't know what it is because it's no longer on disk. We weren't able to find it, but also there's a reference to something called Rad Autoracer Crack Keygen, which is it sounds like a game, and if you see the words crack or keygen, it usually means it's a cracked version of this game, and quite likely, and just from experience, if you see the words crack and keygen, there's probably a 70% chance there's malware in there somewhere. So I took an analysis of this, put it up to VirusTotal, shows that it's malicious. So I'm happy to move on from there. Also, there's references to 3 servers that were connected to via RDP. So RDP again is remote desktop protocol. it allows you to basically remotely connect onto these servers. So we see the AD server, which is the Active Directory server. We see the CEO's PC was accessed. That's 2 new systems. And there's a SQL server as well, which we already know about. A quick review, the firewall logs also support the evidence that we've seen here. So going back to our network diagram, this has suddenly exploded out of control. So the warehouse PC is infected with a rat. That's bad news. We have detected 3 outbound attempts to the CEO PC, the Active Directory system, and the SQL server that we already know about. We found a new file, this explorer.exe. So we have a new, when you find an IOC, you perform a sweep. Is there other systems exhibiting this behavior? So we asked the IT guys to check them out, and yeah, they found the same file in the CEO's PC and the Active Directory server. And again, just like other items, the active antivirus was disabled. One little thing that was different here is that the bad guy used the IT admin account to access both the Active Directory system and the CEO system. For brevity, even though we're blown away over time, I'm not going to be analyzing those systems, but you can more or less gather it'll be a similar analysis. So the timestamps of these files using the MFT shows that they were installed around 2 hours before the SQL server was breached. Okay. Also took a look at the web proxy logs, network logs, and they confirmed the traffic, what did occur around this time. So what happened now is when you kind of get your arms around the brevity or the sheer scale of a situation like this, you build out a timeline, and this will constantly be updated as you find new artifacts. And as you fill in those gaps, the story gets told. So according to what the data points here says is, the initial compromise believed to have occurred on the 23rd of February when cracked software was executed on this warehouse PC directory. I grabbed a copy of that. I ran this in what's called a sandbox environment. Think of it like a virtual machine, but with listening capabilities. And I ran that, and I was able to see that it downloaded and installed Dark Comet, which is that rat. So I'm able to now attribute that cracked software being the initial source of infection. So also the fact, which was mentioned before, there was a shared account on this system. Now, it doesn't really matter who the person was behind the keys, performed that action. It's not my job to say it was that person or that person. And even if it was logged in using a person's account, from a digital perspective, you can't ever prove that that was that person. You would need something like a CCTV, and that's outside our remit. So yeah, once the later on that day, the rat was dropped on the system, and admin rights on the warehouse PC allowed this execution, by the way. So if this system was locked down, the initial exploitation may have occurred, but there wouldn't be installation of the rat, and there certainly wouldn't be execution of the Mimikatz malware. So take an educated guess here. The Mimikatz is executed, and shortly after you see IT admin credentials being used successfully. So you can make an educated guess here that running Mimikatz grabbed those IT admin creds, and those creds were then used to access the CEO PC and server. Once the AD server was accessed, of course, using further exploitation, which we're unaware of, all the credentials were then dumped and then taken back. DB admin account then was used to access the SQL server. The database was dumped using the DB dump malware, and all the data was collected back at home and then likely exfiltrated from the company. Now, we're kind of filling in some gaps there, but you got to make those educated guesses sometimes. If you see this occurring and this occurring, and then you see a third thing occurring, you may be able to make some educated estimations, but again, they're just estimations. So now that we understand how bad things are, we gotta talk about remediation. This is the next step of the incident response lifecycle. Whole network is compromised. Best action is to literally burn it to the ground, almost literally, and start fresh. This is there's no reason why they should be maintained. What I would do is I would take a backup of all confidential information from the SQL server, and I would rebuild the entire enterprise. Also, this is an Irish company, so GDPR might come into play here. There's been a data breach confirmed that somebody outside has the data, so a notification needs to occur within 72 hours of confirmation. But when was this confirmed? The answer is it confirmed long before I arrived in the building. Once the IT guy knew that their data was externally available, that was when they knew. So hopefully they would have contacted, they would have contacted data privacy on how to report the breach. So, a couple of other observations. Why was our local administrator access on all the systems? There was no need for it. Especially the hardware guys just need to use a web browser to print out their items, so they don't need that heavy access. Why was there shared accounts? We can't attribute the ignorant activity, let's call it, on the warehouse system to a person. Not that we need to. That's a HR issue, and that's not for us to determine. But with shared accounts, we cannot put the finger on any one person. All passwords, everything requires a reset, because the actor took Active Directory logs. I'd reset all VPN passwords if there was already. That's a big one. Also, our customers need to know if there's so their usernames, their passwords, their credit card information is out there. Sorry, to take a drink. So they need to know that their data has been involved in a breach. It will be responsible also to issue a public statement. And once that fallout has occurred, so you kind of go, okay, how do we rebuild this and make sure this doesn't go overboard again? It's very simple. Recommend security monitoring. So the AV was disabled on multiple hosts for weeks before detection. This should have set off fire alarms all over the place, but it didn't. Again, it's like the CCTV analogy. You can have the best cameras in the world, but if nobody's looking at them, they're useless. Auditing of account usage on network should be provided as well. Also, holding credit card information on any database is bad practice. So most likely it's not PCI compliant, which is payment card industry. So they may face fines as a result of this. This needs to go immediately. And if there's a cert, so this is an Irish company, so I would be in touch with Irish Cert, for example, and let them know that this occurred in case there's other similar companies being attacked by the same group. Final thoughts, and this is the last slide, I promise. So DFIR is a mechanism for determining what happened where and when, but it's not an exact science. In other words, it's not going to tell you exactly what happened at what time when. It will just kind of release the smoke a bit from what actually occurred. There will be gaps, and no amount of data can fill those in. Multiple artifacts were required to tell the story. That's a vital aspect. So if you look at one or two artifacts, you may only be getting 20% of the story. So in this case, logging was poor. A lot of environments don't think about setting up relevant logging, usually because it takes up a lot of disk space or whatever. But when you come to look for it and it's gone, it's impossible to get that back. So the last thing I'll mention is when you're performing your analysis, you obviously have a theory of what's happening, but I would never, if I said, okay, I think this is a nation state actor, I've no evidence to support that theory, so I wouldn't report that to a person. But if I have evidence to support a theory, I'll report it. As new evidence comes in, your theories may change, but make the theory fit the evidence, not the other way around. And last thing is regarding artifacts, gather what you need. Also gather more than what you need, because you may want to go back and look at other artifacts like memory, for example, but that system's being turned off and therefore it's destroyed forever. So I'm kind of out of wind here. I've blown through. I've actually gone way over on my slides. I didn't realize it'd be 45 minutes, but I kind of just wanted to just kind of ask you if there's any questions on any of the content I've gone through. Sure, there's one person out there that has a great question for me that hasn't, or it can be about anything. It doesn't need to be about digital forensics. It can be about cybersecurity as a whole. about the career opportunities, about, you know, how do you get into cybersecurity, what, you know, what kind of fields. So I'm open to all questions here.
There's a question